Happy holidays! Today's video, I decided to change like last minute the topic. So I think I did say that I was gonna do a video about like my hobbies outside of writing related stuff, and I'm not doing that. You'll know from the title, I'm basically gonna be going through how to come up with ideas for a book, how to know when it's like good, and how to transform that into a book that's in like the early planning stages. Take this as like my Christmas gift to you. This will be going up, I think, about 4 days before Christmas. So if you know, this is for like everybody. If you've been writing for a really long time, if you've never written anything and you've maybe thought, I want to write a novel, or you feel like that's a natural next step but you don't quite know how to get there from where you are, I'm hoping that this will be the thing that helps you. So I'm gonna just start by saying that like everybody's different. Personally, the reason why I think that that's important, there are actually two reasons. The first is that comparing yourself to other people, I know that there's like the whole saying, comparison is the thief of joy, but really don't do that when it comes to your writing, especially because writers they're built, okay? They're not just born being perfect writers. Every single person who knows how to read and write knows how to read and write because they learn how to do it. And I think that there's this sort of misconception about writing that it's one of those things that you either have it or you don't. I do think that there is obviously a divide of people who have a natural ability and then the people who maybe have lesser natural ability, but I don't think that that necessarily... I think there are people who think that you can't write a book or that you can't write well at all if you don't have that natural ability, whereas to me it's more like some people can write books that become once in a generation sort of important novels, whereas other people, you know, they can do well but they just can't quite do that. So I think that there's I think that there is a difference between having... I just think that there's like a difference between perhaps you think that you don't have a natural talent and therefore you could never do it. I don't believe that that's true. Yeah, maybe you would never be like the best writer ever, but that's why you shouldn't compare yourself. I have had that attitude before and I've started to not have it because I think that it holds you back and it makes your writing worse because you're essentially not committing to it because you don't think that anything is going to come of it. The other thing that I would say is that it's good because you shouldn't be using AI. Generative AI, like using it to come up with ideas, using it to come up with outlines, using it to edit your work, don't do that. Especially if you plan on publishing, that's just a huge no-no. But in general, I think that, you know, your skills, they need to be built and you build them by doing those things. Even if you find them a little bit boring, I find outlining to be the worst part of the process. I prefer drafting. It doesn't matter, you know, if you don't like doing that, you still have to know the skill because the skills that you learn in doing that stuff, they're transferable. They're important when it comes to editing, to realise why what you've written is different from your outline and whether or not that's a good thing. It helps you to inform the next book that you write if you write another. These skills, like, I fully just think that they need to be learned alone and like, you know, you develop them. And as well, I think that AI has the problem of not only like the plagiarism but of making your work sound like other people's, whereas everybody has their own voice. And yes, sometimes they're influenced by other people. Mine definitely is influenced by the great books that I've read that I like have running through my head all the times. But I think that basically it's just really important that you develop your own voice and that you develop your own skills, because that's how it should be when you're writing a book. You think like years ago people didn't have AI to write books for them. They got through it, so you can too. And it might seem difficult, but that's because you're learning a skill, especially if you're not a huge writer. My first draft was terrible, and I've been writing all my life. You know, the first time I wrote a book, I didn't really know what I was doing, and now I'm a lot better at it. And they still need a lot of work after a first draft, but if you stick through them, you know, you have something to edit to make better, and that's like the main thing to take away from this. And I just want to say this all first, because I do think that it's really important to understand this before you get into the other stuff, because it's very easy and very normal to feel like maybe you're not good enough or whatever because you're struggling a little bit. That's not the case. It just, some people don't like this bit, some people like the other bits more. Personally, I'm kind of mixed. I like this bit a lot, the starting bit. So I'm going to start talking about that. Basically, coming up with an idea, I think the first thing that I want to say about this is that it can happen at any moment. In terms of ways that you can sort of encourage ideas to come, is A, by engaging with books. Reading widely is very important, but also reading good books, like not just books that you find good, but books that are objectively very good, books that have won awards, books that have, you know, become modern classics is especially one that I would recommend, because modern classics are the ones most likely to have informed contemporary works. I think that stuff like that is really good, but you can also watch TV shows and films. I loved like superhero films when I was younger, so I came up with an idea for a book involving superheroes, and then that evolved into what it is now. And while that still needs a lot of work, it came from the idea of superheroes are cool, which is very simple. You might not necessarily think that's a book idea, but if you want to write a book about something and you think, well, superheroes are cool, you could try and write a book about superheroes. So read widely, but also then consume other types of media, whether it's TV shows or films. You could go and like see paintings in an art museum, in an art gallery. Go and look at like sculptures and historical sites and stuff. I know that a lot of this stuff might not be interesting to you, but it's about what you do have an interest in. Go and engage with the world. Being present in day-to-day life, like for example cloud gazing. You look up at the sky, you see a cloud, you think it looks like a kitten holding a gun. You might think, wouldn't it be kind of cute if I wrote a children's book story thing, like I don't know what it would be specifically, maybe like a board book about a kitten cowboy who tries to root out all of the mice in this town or something. It literally like can be something super small, it can be something super big, and like you instantly know. The thing that I would say for point B is that you never have to fear that an idea is too simple, because I think a lot of people, they doubt themselves, and they specifically what they do is they say, well, this idea is very generic, so it's probably already been done, or it definitely has already been done, and then they write themselves off. I actually have a podcast, if you don't know me, and we talked about this on one episode. We took the same story prompt and we wrote a short story, and they were both completely different. I'll leave the link in the description so that you can go and like see exactly how different. But I do think that it is important to acknowledge that just because, you know, an idea sounds generic doesn't mean that your version of it will be. And for this specific stage, I want you to avoid feeling that way, because we're not deciding whether or not this is a good idea yet. We're just thinking of ideas. And so I personally get a lot of ideas from things like dreams. I get a lot of ideas from thunderstorms. You know, I get a lot of ideas from things like fireworks and, you know, like little like things like that, like little, not explosions necessarily. I know that I've kind of just given kind of like explosion-y imagery, but things that are like, you could take a picture of it and it would just be so interesting that you would want to look at it for a really long time. And I find those things especially interesting when they take like a brief moment of time, because I think that the brief, like when you think about a film, right? A scene in a film might last for like 5 minutes. Reading that same film is like in a book form, that scene, you know, the author could spend more time developing like the descriptions of the events, of the emotions of the characters. Those like little brief 5 to 10-second sort of lightning strikes, the whiz of a rocket as it explodes, those things in a book can be pages long. And I'm not saying that you should overwrite. I personally prefer underwriting, if anything, but I do think that those moments, you know, you can add depth to them in a book in a way that you can't necessarily do in other mediums, because you have interiority, like you have the ability to get into a character's head, to get into the narrator's head, whether you're the narrator or somebody else. And so what I'm trying to say is that these like little things, you might think that they're not good enough. They could be. Even if you just think of a scene and then you go from there, that's an idea. To give some examples, I really like Blockbuster, like The Shop. I used to go there every week. We would pick a film on like Friday nights and we would buy some snacks and we would watch it, and then we'd obviously return it. That was a fun part of my childhood that I physically can't do anymore. I think there's only one Blockbuster in the world and it's in America. That sort of like vibe of like going to a rental shop for, you know, a VHS or a DVD as it was in the later days, it was really fun, you know? And so I wanted to create a story that had a shop like that as its focus. And so I went from there, and it became a crime thriller, sort of like a mystery involving an employee of a shop with very much like those vibes, you know? And I just think that, you know, you have these thoughts sometimes that you're not, you know, coming up with something that could be a novel, and so you disregard it. I don't want you to do that. Another idea that I had, I saw a picture of Sabrina Carpenter. This is my most recent one. I've talked about this before. And I will say, I've got a video of me doing the planning process, so the next stage after you've developed an idea. But basically, I saw this picture of it, and I was like, I want to write a book about a singer with kind of depressing vibes, but who has like this sort of very luxurious, classy sort of image, right? And then it's hiding this darker sort of melancholy. And it became what it became. And I'm really proud of it. And I think that when you sometimes see something like that and you have inspiration kind of hit you out of nowhere, you should follow that. Because even if it seems like, well, it's not even an idea, it's just a feeling. Follow the feelings. Because that's what it can be. And to think like of books on my shelf, you know, Convenience Store Woman is a very popular book. In theory, you could say that that book literally came about because she was like, what if I wrote a book about a woman who just really loves working in a convenience store? So maybe you walk into like a corner shop or something and you just think, what is it like to be one of the people who works just behind the counter in a corner shop all day, every day? That's an idea. It isn't developed yet, and that's fine. We're going to get to that in a minute. But that counts. And I'm trying to like really harp on this because I feel like it's really so easy to just discount those ideas before you form them fully. But they are ideas. They're not fully formed. That's okay. That is what happens. You don't, more often than not, like when you come up with a novel idea, you don't have like an immediate knowledge of everything that's going to happen. I wanted to write a book about Formula One. That was an idea. That was it. And then it came to a point where I was just like, it's going to be about a woman and it's going to be about mental health, and it's going to be a trilogy and it's going to cover her entire career. That's how that started, my main book series, like, that I've been working on. And I just think, like, you need to follow those, like, little moments more than maybe you are. Because, yeah, okay, maybe crime thrillers or something that have been done, like, a million times, but you know what? It's the first book, I'm assuming. Like, if you're struggling, it's probably your first, right? Your first book doesn't have to be amazing. If you just put in a bit of effort and learn how to do this, the next one will be better and you'll find it easier. When I come up with an idea, what I do is I write it down. I had an idea that I wanted to write a book about pyramid scheme. That is all I have so far for that idea. But I've written it down because one day I'll get to it and I'll develop it. Some of the books, let me try and think. I have a few. I wanted to write a book about a detective. I came up with a name that was cool, and then it turned out that the name of the place that I chose for the title was actually just a really cool place. And I was like, this is the vibe I'm going for. That will be perfect. So sometimes you can literally just come up with stuff like that. I wanted to write a Sex and the City inspired book, you know, something about a group of friends who have, like, discussions about their love and their relationships. So I came up with a book based off of that. Like, it literally, you can come off of things from, like, an image that you see. It could be that you have, like, a sort of vibe and that you go from there. Or it could be that you have themes, you know, you could write a book about mental health and go from that. You could decide to write a book about a singer or a shop worker, or, you know, someone from, like, the past. You know, that's the stuff that you start with. So I'm gonna assume, you can come back later if you want, but I'm gonna assume that you're watching this now because you have an idea, whether it's really small or really big. Here's how you do that. So basically, the first thing I do is I try and think about the general vibe, and sometimes it helps to come up with a character. So for my singer book, I knew I wanted her to be a little different from my other characters that I have. My main character of my Formula One books is a blonde woman who is very tall, obviously very strong. So I wanted her to be a bit more willowy. I wanted her to be a brunette. You know, I wanted to be one of those women who has a look that looks very low maintenance and therefore very easy. But she looks very good with it. Whereas my other main character, she puts a lot of effort in, and it's like one of her things is that when she puts effort in, she feels better about herself, and when she's not putting the effort in, it's because she's really stressed, right? So it's like, that stuff's really important. The way that a character looks throughout a story can be very significant. I'm gonna just moisturize my hands actually because they're really dry. But basically, what you want to do is you want to figure out what makes it easier for you. This can be trial and error. So I'm sorry, I can't really, you know, it's not a one size fits all. As I said, everybody's different. Everybody has their strengths, their weaknesses. Mine is outlines and following them. Other people's are different, and that's okay. If you struggle to come up with characters, that's great. Piece of advice that I would give for that, something I do is I consider the time period that I want it to be set in. I have the next book that I'm going to write after the singer book, which I wasn't going to, but then I was like, actually, now that I'm talking about it, they sound like companion pieces, because they're both about famous women who are in the spotlight and they go a little bit insane, literally. And so I decided to set one in the modern day because it made sense, because she's a pop star. I felt like the modern day pop star, it would be really interesting to have, for example, she has a whole song about the origins of pop music and how especially women in pop music in the industry were sort of begun by, like, the showgirls who made it more normal to sort of have women dancing and singing on stage and it not necessarily be in a super serious, you know, in an attractive way, like using their sexuality. I think that that sort of thing is really interesting to call, like, sort of attention to. And so while it's not going to be a huge theme, she would feel it more if she was a modern day pop star. And since she's based off of, like, for example, Sabrina Carpenter, Taylor Swift, you know, their levels of like fame and success, and, you know, their, not necessarily their image, but their style of sort of songwriting and stuff that gets very mainstream very easily. That is something that made me want to put it in the modern day. Whereas the other book is set in the 80s, and it's set in the 80s because she is going to be an actress filming a horror film, right? And her filming this horror film in the 80s, it just felt like the vibe was better, you know? And I think especially sometimes it's fun to play around with, you know, the era that you're working with if you are dealing with those sorts of themes, because yes, it's really important to have modern stories about mental health and sexuality and stuff like that, but sometimes it's really interesting to take a character back into the past and have them experience it in a time where you, the writer, understand these things better than the scientists of the time understand these things. Because it gives you like a sort of spark to work with. So consider things like the time period. That may come a bit later. Consider the main character. Who would be best to sort of tell this story? Is there anyone that calls to you? It could be somebody similar to you. It could be somebody that you look up to, a sort of person that you want to be and that you therefore are able to write with a lot of affection. It could be somebody that you despise. That can really help, I think, because you come up with ways in which their story progress. And if you root for them as a person, if you like them, you're more likely to write a story where their life turns out all right and it has a happy ending. Or you're more likely to write their story with sympathy, even if it has a bad ending. Whereas, you know, if you don't like them, maybe you want to make them really suffer, and that can influence the events that you decide to have in the book. So what you then want to do is you want to take your idea and you want to figure out an actual plot. Nothing too specific. You don't need a step-by-step outline yet. We're not there. That's after this, okay? What you're going to want to do, though, is really just think, what do you like about this idea? So, for example, the singer idea, I really liked the idea of this picture of Sabrina Carpenter. It was her looking gorgeous, but also having kind of like a sadness to her. And it was part of the show. It wasn't like she... It's not like I looked at this picture of an actually sad woman and was like, wow, that's so amazing. But the idea to me of that sadness being real and like a singer holding it together while they're on stage and performing and being this classy, you know, beautiful pop star who everybody adores at the minute, and then she's kind of breaking down quietly, or it becomes like, as she goes through it, you know, it becomes less quiet because she just can't hold it in anymore. That really spoke to me. And so that's what the book is. It's a pop star who is at the height of her fame. She's never been this famous. Everything that she's ever wanted is happening. And her past, that she has like stuff that went on, it's coming back to haunt her, and it starts to haunt her literally. Like there's this sort of, not in like a ghost sense, like there's no ghosts, it's not paranormal, but like it starts to really like impact the way that she acts, the way that she feels, and that starts to sort of like, there's a whole song about how, I actually wrote it, I've been writing songs for this book, they're awful, but the whole song is about, ostensibly it's about this singer being like, oh, I get really jealous very easily. And so you think that this relationship's going to be great when you meet me because I seem great, but then I very quickly change it up because I just can't help it. And one of the lines is about how the rot starts at the root. And that's kind of her thing, right? Like these songs are supposed to represent not just her music and like the ideas of like being a woman and enjoying dating and stuff like that and of having insecurities, but her journey as a character from being pretty secure and looking very beautiful to the cause of the rot not being addressed, and it's spreading until it overtakes the beauty. And so, you know, she sings these songs that show her state, but they're kind of like prophetic because she ignores the reality and she can't do anything about it, and then she starts to really experience more stress, and then she just snaps. And so that was like the whole thing, was that I just thought, how cool would it be to write a book about a singer who has this really beautiful vibe, but then there's something deeper there. And it transformed into, you know, what happened. And so basically what you want to do is you want to figure out, you know, let's say that you saw a candle and the candle smelled like, I'm gonna just grab my candle. So my dad bought me this candle. He buys me, everyone buys me candles. And I love candles, but I hate them because they give me a headache sometimes. I don't know, I love them, but I just, you know. So this smells apparently of bergamot, which I never know how to say, lavender and patchouli. The lavender is the strongest, but I can definitely smell the other things mixed in there, right? Sorry for just sniffing a candle. I promise I've got a point. Now, this candle, it smells like these things because they're supposed to be relaxing. It's called the Hotel Collection. Don't really know what that means. Warning, candles can cause fires. You could write a book about a candle, inspired by a candle, where you could literally go, imagine this was somebody's like smell, right? They smelled like lavender all the time because they had a lavender whole, like, it was almost like the lavender had taken over their entire garden, so their entire house just stinks of lavender and they stink of lavender, and it's not a bad thing. But then maybe one day this character who smells of lavender does something really awful to another character who obviously associates that person with lavender because they stink of lavender. And so because they have done this thing that hurts this person, perhaps they've committed like an actual crime, this person, I can feel that hair and it's just really irritating. They associate lavender with this person who's really hurt them, and maybe the book is about that person who's been hurt rather than the person who smells of lavender. So you get the inspiration of lavender, but you don't then use that person as your main character, right? Because you want to talk about how whenever this person smells lavender, maybe they call that person, maybe the book is like kind of like a long letter to their sort of attacker where they say, you know, they name them lavender rather than, because they're never intending to like post this letter. They're never intending, but they're walking through everything about how their life was. They're reminiscing on, or they could be just like narrating it in general. They could just be like, yeah, I knew this person, let's call them Lavender. But before that, my life was different. And they show their life before, they show their life after. Maybe it's a dual timeline where it cuts from the past to the present, to the past to the present. And perhaps the past builds up to the event that made them not comfortable around lavender. Maybe the present is them dealing with the trauma or having met somebody new. Maybe they were in a relationship with lavender. Maybe they were in a relationship and now the smell of lavender reminds them of that house and that person and what happened there. And now they're in a new relationship and that person starts to remind them of lavender because of like little things, little hobbies, nothing that's like necessarily a red flag, but that to them it makes them feel a little panicked, a little stressed. Maybe you write a story, maybe you find a penny on the floor, and you know the whole thing, like pick a penny, find a penny, pick it up, all day long you'll have good luck. Maybe you write a story about somebody who finds a penny on the floor but it's covered in blood. Maybe you write a story about somebody who finds a mysterious stain on their shirt and they don't know where it came from, and it's like this really weird stain, and it turns out that it's like from this slimy creature that's been living in their house without them noticing, and it's like a horror story or like a sort of supernatural story about like weird ghost things, you know? when I say that anything can be turned into an idea, I really mean that. I think that it just has to call to you, okay? I can't really, you know, if you have like thoughts about ideas but you're not sure how to make it an idea, if you want, you comment them and I'll sort of give some ideas to give you a bit of inspiration on that specific idea. But I think that really you should be looking for something that inspires you and transforming that in a way that is logical. So it could be that, you know, you have a character who always wears headphones and then you go into why they always wear headphones. And that's the story. And therefore from there you think, well, why would somebody always wear headphones? What would make them want to do that? Is it that they really like music? Is it that they are losing their hearing and they don't want people to know, so they just wear headphones so that people don't talk to them and they can't not hear what people are saying to them? Is it that they've closed themselves off so that they just listen to music all the time because they feel like they don't deserve friends and they don't deserve to communicate with people? If you want to write something that's fairly easy, I would recommend like a contemporary story set in, you know, the world that you live in. That could mean that you see a couple on a train, right? You're on the train, there's a couple, maybe they have a little dance because it's dark, you know? They've maybe been out, they've had some drinks, some dinner, they're going home, and on the train, it's empty, they decide to just do a little twirl sort of thing, just have a little slow dance on the train. And maybe you decide to write a story about a couple, you know, a romance, about like a couple who they meet and they just have this really beautiful love story, and that is like a scene that you include in it. And, you know, again, you don't have to figure out beat for beat what happens, you just have to have like the vibe, and you have to kind of solidify that into like a general idea for what the plot's gonna be. So I knew that I wanted it to be about a singer who had this incident happen with this like missing person 8 years ago, and then she got mega famous, and now she's like height of the fame, doing her first big tour. She feels amazing about it, and then somebody asks a question that reminds her of the night that this guy went missing, and his name starts to come up in conversation with her more often because people start to understand that that's what happened. And you never really know until like the halfway point exactly why she's so afraid, and you don't even know whether it's justified. And to be honest, you see the incident and you think you don't really need to be so like, that's not the worst thing that anyone's ever done, like you're literally fine. But the way that she deals with it, it's like she catastrophizes and it goes from there, right? I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. I just knew that I wanted it to have this sort of thing happen and it be about her degradation in terms of her mental state as a result of this happening. And so I figured out some major plot pieces, aka like the devices. So for example, there's a missing knife from her kitchen, and that is pretty significant to the story. I wanted her obviously to be a singer, so obviously I wanted her visuals pinned down in order to figure out what kind of song she would write, and therefore whether or not it would be natural for her music to progress the way that I wanted it to progress. That's what you're thinking about. I need a drink. I'm just talking. But I'm gonna pick a book and I'm gonna just deconstruct it, and then I'll sort of show you like what I would do if I was coming up with this book to figure out, like, you know, how to turn it from a basic idea. Okay, this is a book that I recommend. I actually did put it in my Christmas like gift guide video that I did. It's Remarkably Bright Creatures, and this book basically is about an octopus, it's about an older woman, and it's about a young man. They all have different stories. This smells so good. I say this every time. It just smells like the copy that I have of The Hobbit did when I first bought it, and so every time I hear this, like, that's one of my favourite books, so every time I smell this, I'm there. I'm 11. whatever, and I'm just absolutely obsessed with The Hobbit, and I'm just so happy that my mum took me to the shop to buy it. So this book, I'll stop, I promise. This book, you could say, what if I wrote a book about an octopus? You could see an octopus in an aquarium, or you could watch a nature documentary and see one. This is why it's important to not just read books but to also do other stuff, because especially for myself, I don't have like the ability to visualize stuff. And so when I see something, sometimes it's a picture that I see on Pinterest, sometimes it's something that I see in a TV show, a film, sometimes, you know, it's just like the real world around me. You know, like I saw a flash of lightning. I love lightning. I love thunderstorms so much. So when I see them, I get really inspired, and I decide to write books where rainstorms or thunderstorms are a huge part of it. There's one in Formation Lap. There's a thundery scene, and it has a really cute moment, I think, with my main character and her teammate, and it's like one of those things that shows that they have started to warm up to each other, and it's in a chapter that's very significant. So I think that like these little things, you know, they make a difference, and I think that when you see them you will know. And I also will say, like, I watched Prison Break recently for the first time, and one of those characters is part of the inspiration for my character in the singing book. And it wasn't even necessarily intentional, but the further that I got in, the more I noticed the similarities. And I just think when you sometimes, you know, do stuff like that, it's really interesting. I read The Hustler and The Colour of Money. They inspired me a lot when I was writing Formation Lap. I'd already read one of them before I started, and then I read the sequel, like, I think when I was like at the very end, or when I was doing edits or something, and I was just like, this is exactly what I want my book to be like. And I don't know if I achieved that, but I'm happy with the book that I got because I identified the vibe of what I wanted. And so that's why I advise to read and to watch films and to see like stuff like that. Go to art galleries, engage with culture, look at the people around you, be present. And again, don't use AI, because the real world, I think, is just so beautiful. And like, why damage it with AI when you can just get all of that inspiration from the world around you? Even if you live somewhere that you think is really boring, I think that there's beauty in some really everyday mundane things, right? It could be a parent picking up their child after they fall over, and you could decide to write a book about a single parent who's just doing their best with their kid. And maybe you know, romance is very popular, so maybe you're a romance writer, or you want to be. It could be that you decide to write a romance about a single mother who meets a very charming person who ends up being, you know, helpful in their journey and makes them and their child feel safe in the way that they had only ever felt safe with each other. It could be that you turn it into a thriller where that person's child goes missing and they try and get them back. It could be that you write a story about the mother of the child or the parent of the child and the child from the future, where the mother, for example, I'm thinking of a mother and a daughter, because I'm a woman, so a lot of my books focus on women. It could be about a woman whose daughter is kind of estranged from her, but she still loves her, and she it's not necessarily that she did anything wrong, it's just that as they grew up, you know, maybe they had differences when the daughter was a teenager and they just never quite became close in the way that they used to be. And you focus on the mother in the past when the daughter was like really close to her and when she was younger and for the years up until she was a teenager, whereas in the daughters you're in the future and you're watching her try and mend her relationship with her mother. Maybe that sort of thing is really interesting, and it can be very literary. So if you wanted to have a stab at writing something more sort of serious, that would be good. I got really obsessed for a while with D-Day specifically. I love the Second World War history-wise, but D-Day specifically and like the paratroopers was really interesting to me, so I decided to write a book about one. I was very interested in the idea of writing a vampire story set in the 70s. You know, like kind of because of the images of the intro of the What We Do in the Shadows TV show, where they have these pictures of them throughout the decades in the fashions of the decades. And I was like, it would be really fun to write a story about vampires in the 70s. And then I was like, what if it was like a Romeo and Juliet story, right? I actually thought Romeo and Juliet but vampires first. But then I came up with the idea of like it being the Romeo and Juliet story where I had like 70s vampires. Two sort of vibes that I merged together. This one, so let's say that you see a picture of an octopus, you see a live octopus in a tank in an aquarium, you see an octopus on a documentary, whatever, blah, 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 blah. You could then say, okay, what if I wrote a book that was kind of from the perspective of an octopus, and it was in captivity, but it wanted to go to the ocean. It wanted to be free because it knew that it was dying, because it knew that, you know, it was only supposed to live this many days, and it has been this many days since it remembers being alive or whatever. And so it's dying soon and it wants to get out. Then you think, well, that might be a bit boring on its own because most people don't want to read books about animals like from the perspective of the animal. So what if I wrote about a person who also worked in the aquarium and became friends with this octopus and gained a lot of respect for it, but also was really sad that he was going to die in captivity. And maybe she needs this octopus a lot because she doesn't really have anyone in her life. Maybe she's a woman who is widowed. Maybe her son, something happened to him and so he died young. Maybe she just is starting to give up and feel like maybe she should succumb to old age and to the way that she, you know, is being told by other people that she should be living her life. And this octopus is the only thing that she really has that makes her want to say, no, I don't want to do that. And then you think, well, maybe I bring in a young man. And this young man, he is a bit useless. He doesn't really have a work ethic. He's just been broken up with over how basically useless he is. He's a bit of a man-child. And he goes and ends up getting a job at this aquarium because he's trying to find his father, who he believes lived in this region, right? In this like small town or whatever. And he thinks that his father is a millionaire and that's the only reason that he's going looking for him. But while he's there, he's working with this older woman and he gains respect for, you know, the things that she has a lot of respect for. You know, she's old and she's still working because she just feels like that's important. And so they learn from each other and they learn from the octopus and all of their stories end up connecting. And so, you know, it's really easy to say, well, how would I even, you know, transform it? It's literally up to you. As I said, feel free to like brainstorm with me in the comments because I love doing that. I think it's really fun to talk to other human beings and like get input. That's a lot of how my stories develop, is I get excited about them and I want to talk about them and then I'm like, oh, and this could happen and that could happen. And again, you don't need to think yet about the specific plots. I have a whole video talking about how I outline a book. I don't think about the specific things that are going to happen chapter by chapter until I've actually gotten to that stage, right? Like I don't do any of that. So don't worry about that yet. I would advise go watching that video. I'm actually going to be filming the process of me writing this entire book. And that was the first video. I think that was like 2 weeks ago or something. And so it's pretty recent. It should show up, right? But I think that it's really easy to doubt yourself. It's really easy to feel that you aren't doing a good job as a writer, and you shouldn't. And I know that it's very basic info to give, and I'm sorry if this isn't super helpful, but I just feel like really it's about, you know, figuring out what do you want to write about. Do you want to write a book about a superhero? Because if so, that's a good idea. Just do it. It doesn't matter if it's been done. It doesn't matter if it's not popular right now. writing the first book is the hardest because you're going to doubt at times that you can't do it. You're going to think, you know, about these different problems that you've never had to face before, and it's going to feel tough. So do something that you're passionate about and that you can see yourself, because especially a lot of people, they work. I wasn't working. I did mine in 2.5 months. A lot of people aren't going to be able to do that, especially if you're writing like fantasy ideas. You might see a mountain one day and think, wow, what if I wrote a story about a kingdom in the mountains, right? And maybe they are starting to struggle with their crops because a vengeful god has like condemned them. And so the main character has to go on a journey down the mountain for the first time ever into unknown lands in order to appease this god, or they have to go through the mountains looking for a shrine that got lost so that they can pray to this god and be like, look, we are seeking forgiveness and we please don't let us starve, right? Maybe that's their journey. Maybe there's a war. Maybe there's a war and an avalanche or something happens as a result of the war. Or, you know, just think about stuff. You know, you could watch Mulan and be like, wow, that's really cool. I'm gonna write a story about a woman who like, retellings are also allowed. I think what I'm trying to say is that basically every idea that you have is something that could eventually be turned into a novel. That doesn't mean that it's going to end up working out, but you have to just trust that, you know what you're doing, even if you think that you don't. And if you've never done this before, watch other people for inspiration. Read more books. I think a lot of people, they think that writing's super easy, and that anyone can do it, and anyone can, but that doesn't mean that they do it well. Read books, learn how punctuation is used, look that stuff up if you don't know, if it's been a while since you were in school. Look up things like editing stuff and like use those skills so that you can bear in mind things like sentence structure and whatnot when you're planning. Think about like how many sort of chapters you want. Like, is it going to be a super long book? Is it going to be a super short book? Because that really helps me. I like long chapters. So I know that I don't have to worry too much about thinking of like specific scenes, because I know that I can fit the scenes into like any chapter if I want to, because the chapters are long enough that I can make it work. But if you want really short chapters, if that's what you like, maybe you think about like a whole chapter and then you go and you build it around that. You know, like maybe you have this image of a school reunion, and maybe you went to a school reunion recently and you were like, oh my god, I hated those people. They became insufferable after school ended. Maybe you write a book about a character who was bullied in school, and they go back and they realize that everything was really stupid and that they've ruined their life based off of the self-confidence issues that they got from being bullied by people who suck. And that now they go, like, that could be like the first scene of the book, or it could be like the second scene or something, or like in terms of like if you have short chapters, it could be like chapter 3 or 4, right? Could be, it's the inciting incident. Save the Cat is very useful for beginners, especially because it talks about story structure. There's also one called Romancing the Beat, which is for romance specifically, which, as I said, very popular. There's Save the Cat for horror novels and stuff like that. Like, there's just so many different books about story structure. The 3-act structure is also very good. You can look that up. But basically, what you want to do is you want to think like, oh, so if they had a school reunion and they realized that everyone sucked, they could then maybe think, well, I didn't go for the jobs that I wanted because I was afraid of people like that being in control of me again, because they were the kind of people who always had it together. But then you find out that they didn't have it together, and that they now have like dead-end jobs, and so do you, and you don't like it, and you're thinking as the character, and so you think that in like chapter 3 or 4 they're going to be at this reunion and they're going to realize that they need to get their life together because they sabotaged themselves as a result of the things that these people did to them, because they just made these assumptions that everything was going to be terrible. And so you have the rest of the book could be this person, maybe they make a to-do list of things to do in their life, and they try and get a better job, and they try and get a boyfriend or whatever. They try and, you know, make their house nicer or something. Maybe they start going out and making like actual friends because they didn't have the confidence to do that before. Think My Name is Earl, the TV show. Love that show to death. It could be something like that, where like a character has a moment that changes their life. You could think of the moment. You could think of the fact that they want to change their life. You could see a bucket list and think, oh, that's really cool, I want to write about a bucket list. It doesn't have to be original, okay? The way that you write a story will make it original, and if it doesn't matter. You don't have to publish it. It's practice. Every book that you write is practice. And that's great. That's literally, like, it's fine. And I think that when you, I got praise from a friend of mine the other day, and this isn't like a negative thing, I'm not saying it as like he shouldn't have said it, but he said to me that it was good that I was like being bold in the stories that I was choosing to write as a newer writer, right? Because I've only written like 3 novels and 2 halves of 2 different novels. And I think what he meant and what I understand is that I'm taking on quite broad ideas. I'm taking on things that, you know, they require a little bit of research because I have nothing about the subject that I really know from a personal level. Like, it's not like I'm writing a story about somebody like me. I'm writing a story about people that are quite different for me in a lot of ways. And I get that. And I think that I honestly do recommend doing that. If you think an idea is too intimidating, write it anyway. Because I swear you grow more when you push yourself. It's like reading diversely. I don't say to do that just because I read fairly diversely. I say it because you should be pushing yourself. If you only read this type of book, read this type of book instead for just once, so like 1 book, 1 or 2 books, right? It will get better, and you will see how other people, because sometimes as well, like if you, as I said, if you're a romance writer, if you read a few horror books, you might realize that there are some things in those books, some tropes in this genre that you don't usually read in, that you could use. You know, that's how we get like merging genres. That's how we get things like sports fiction, because I liked watching sports, so I decided to write a book about sports. That's how we get sports people writing books in romance. It's how we get sort of books about, you know, queerness also happening to be in the horror genre and queer horror stories. It's how we end up with these different ideas, and I think you should be embracing it, right? And I think I'm going to kind of end it because I don't really know how else to inspire you. If this hasn't worked, I'm sorry. But basically just go out and live your life and have your eyes open the whole time. Have your ears open. Maybe someone tells a joke to their friend and you hear it, and that dynamic makes you want to write about a friendship like that. And then from there you think about how maybe these friends could get separated, or maybe they spend too much time together. And maybe their relationship becomes strained, or maybe they grow as people and then their relationship grows stronger. Think about those things. Think about what you like and what like fascinates you, and write about that. You know, all of my ideas are things that I've read books that have made me want to write in something that has that vibe. They're things that I've watched TV shows and I've fallen in love with a character and I've thought, I want to write a character that's like that. And you don't copy them, but you transform these like feelings inside of you into a novel. And I think that that is basically all that I can say, is that you have to just trust that you're doing what you're doing and that it's going to pay off. And to not disregard things just because it seems like it won't do anything. If it's a flash moment of like, I want to write a book about something like this, write that down. Like, write that down, okay? I have a whole Google Doc just for my ideas. Write it down. Write it down. And then what I do is I get a new document. I put the idea in and I start brainstorming the vibe, what sort of like setting I want, what sort of time period. I come up with the names of the characters. I love to go online and see what names were popular at the time that the character would have been born. I like to look at the meanings of some names. I have a zombie book. I had a dream. I had this one thing in the dream and I was like, that's really cool. I want to write a book about that. And I decided to name the character of the book Cassandra, based off of the, you know, the Greek mythology character who, you know, she wasn't believed. She was given the gift of prophecy and then she wronged the god. And so he like punished her by making it so that while she still had her gift, because he couldn't take it away, no one would ever believe the things that she said. So like she predicted the fall of Troy, but no one believed her. And so she's sort of condemned to that. And I think that I don't know how yet, because I've not developed that story yet, but I have decided that this story is going to have this scene that I had in my dream, but obviously a bit different because it's reality. Well, not reality, but it's dream logic doesn't work, and you have to have like the suspension of disbelief in a novel. So I'm going to have that, and she is going to be the main character, and she's going to be selfish because maybe people don't listen to her when she tells the truth. You know, like that's the sort of vibe of her character, and that's all I know. And it's going to be a novel one day. And so when you have like stuff like that, that's basically your plot, is that somehow this character with this sort of personality and this way of life in this post-apocalyptic world has to get to this scene happening, which probably means that based off of the dream that I had, that she's going to have to team up with people and that she's going to agree to help them, and she's maybe going to be afraid that this is going to be another time where these people don't trust her and they don't believe her, and it ends up just ruining how she feels about everything again. And so she doesn't want to be there, but she does it anyway because she kind of passed through for her own survival. That is a plot that I would go into the planning stage with. That is literally all that you need, I think, to then later on start thinking about the specific things that are going to happen along the way, what these sort of emotional beats are going to be, as well as like, you know, the sort of things that are going to happen to make it more complicated than it sounds. And I think that when you have that idea, go to my other video. I know I don't want to plug it, but there are loads of videos about outlining novels. You can watch any of them. But mine is going to go through the entire process from start to finish of writing a novel. And once you've gotten past this stage of just getting an idea and like a sort of vision, very vague vision, that's the video that you go to, because that's where I was when I did that. And I was a little bit ahead because I did do some brainstorming, because I had to write query letter. I say I had to, I didn't have to, I chose to. Sometimes I think that helps though. Sometimes before you write a book, before you plan it, writing a query letter can really help you nail the vibe and like a general plot. Like basically it's a blurb, which I had already written as part of my like musings of the vague idea of what I wanted to happen in this book. And so that's what you do. You get a vision, you have a vibe, and you have a vague plot. And then you move on and you plan it and you actually make it into something, and you decide, yes, this is a book that I can write, because like it has structure now. So if that's where you're at now, if you have an idea and you think, well, I want it to be kind of about this, you have an idea. And even if you didn't know it until this moment, you have one. And you can go on to the next step, which is to turn that sort of vague idea and plot into an actual novel. And that's why I also wanted to say that this could be a video useful for people who have written a lot but they don't know if their book ideas are good enough. Don't do that. If it's not good enough, you'll know when you've written it. If it's not good enough to be a full-length novel, and I say good enough, it may be a novella, it may be a short story. Sometimes you don't figure that out until later. It doesn't make you lesser of a writer that you don't know that yet. Especially if you've never done it before. I had never done it before. I had no idea what it was going to be like. And it was a mess, and then I fixed it, because that's what you do. And I'm going to be going through the process. It's going to be fairly slow because it'll probably take me like 3 months, and I'm not starting until the 1st of January to actually write the book. But follow along if you want, and I will give, you can like see the other video that I did. As I said, I'll link it. I did like a bunch of sort of talking to the camera while I did the writing of the outline, and I walked you through my process, and it wasn't the most in-depth ever, but I'm gonna do more of that where I show you how I like structure my chapters and how I use my outline to create stuff. And I'm gonna do vlogs, and I'm gonna do like stuff about the editing process, because this is the next book that I can see myself going through all of the different editing stages through. Like, I have written a few first drafts since my last book that I did that, which was my first. But this book, I think I want to query this one. Like, if I don't get an agent for my other book, I won't even mind, because I have this book and I think that this is something special. And so I'm going to be doing all the process, the whole thing, not just writing a first draft and then leaving it for a while. You are advised, by the way, to leave a first draft for like a month after you've written it. I didn't do that. But yeah, so like don't rush it, because it's fine. The longer that you take, realistically, the more that you'll forget what you've already got, the sooner you can start brainstorming how to make it better. And I just think that's like the main thing that you should take away from this. You can always make something better if it exists. If you don't give an idea time to grow and become an actual novel, it just won't. There are a lot of novels, you know, The Grapes of Wrath. I read the diaries, the journals of The Grapes of Wrath. It's called Working Days. I actually really recommend it. He says there, John Steinbeck, that he had this idea of a family traveling from Oklahoma to California because of the Depression, and because he was watching the people migrating as a result of the Depression, searching for work because, you know, they were being made poor and their homes were being taken. And he had an idea of, to sort of offset that, of this very personal journey, to have little pockets of these scenes where it was just showing how broad this issue was, that it wasn't just this family, that it was like the whole country. And he didn't know if it was going to work. He didn't know what it was going to be like. He just kind of had an idea of like the end image and of like certain things that he wanted to happen. And he got there, and it's like a masterpiece. And he did like a draft and a bit of light editing, and that's it. Most people don't do that. Don't think that that's the norm. It is not, okay? But I think it just goes to show that like an idea can seem really simple, but if you think of it and you're passionate about it, it can become something great. And that's what I'm going to leave you with. This is the last video before Christmas. So as I said, this is kind of like my Christmas gift. I hope it was helpful. Feel free to leave comments talking about it. I also post a lot on TikTok about my books, if you want to follow the process without having to watch me talk for like an hour, because I am very wordy on here. I post much shorter TikToks, usually like sound bites from films and TV shows and stuff. And I think that was my stomach, if you heard that. I'm hungry. I'm gonna go eat. But basically, happy Christmas. Or if you're not, you know, Christian, I'm not Christian, but it's not really a Christian holiday, because you think about it, it just isn't. So whatever you are, sorry, that's how I wanted to say that. But however you are, whatever you are, whatever you believe, I hope that this end of the year is a very good time for you. I know that it can be a really bad time for people's depression. I know that I've been feeling it. I know one of my friends has been feeling it. It kind of sucks, and it really, you know, there are moments of joy. And I think that as a writer especially, or as somebody who wants to be a writer, the only thing that I would say that you have to do to be a writer, by the way, is to write. And I think that you know, you can use this holiday season, rather than getting kind of bummed out by it, maybe to see the beauty in the twinkling lights on a Christmas tree, or to see the frost on the pavement outside and how it looks kind of like a million diamonds smiling up at you. Or maybe you're with family and you kind of hate it, and you take that as a way of deciding that, you know what, maybe I'm going to process the fact that I hate my family by writing a book about a really hateful family. You know, really try and take the best from it rather than the worst, because I really do know how awful it can be. I've managed to make Christmas something that I actually quite enjoy, and I hope that everybody can do that. But if you can't, just try to see the things that are worth, you know, living through them even though they're not that great. Because I think that that's how we survive. And I know that this is a bit of a bummer to end the video, but yeah, happy Christmas, happy holidays, and I really do hope that you have a holly jolly rest of the year, and I will see you in the new year for videos that I'm going to do, including writing my book, starting writing, breaking ground, and I think that, you know, you've got this, and if it's not for you and you hate it, there's no shame in that, but if you want to try it, just give it a go. You've got nothing to lose. And writing is, I think, one of the reasons why people think that it's easier is because it's so accessible. If you know how to read and write, you know how to write. You might not be good at it, but don't get intimidated by that. You know, I wasn't very good when I started. It was better than some people's work, but it had a lot that was wrong with it. I think that, you know, you put a lot of pressure on yourself and you shouldn't. And I just hope that this helps. Have a good time. Bye.